Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I am excited to have with me today on the show, Kaitlin Windle. Kaitlin, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here.
So I would love to hear a little bit about what your company does, and then also the path that led you to what you're doing today.
Sure. So I started a company called APT, APTE. And what we do is we automate primarily fundraising and financial performance reports for nonprofits and independent schools. And we automate those and push those to the leadership teams to be used for internal meetings and decision-making purposes, and also for the board, really trying to push forward the nonprofit field to use data to have better decision-making, be able to use data to drive strategy and really understand at the tip of your fingers or white glove service of how your organization is performing. So how did I get here?
Yes.
That's the $1 million question. So I started my career in finance. After school, I went to JP Morgan, New York City, worked on Wall Street in investment banking, mergers and acquisitions, IPOs, 100-hour work weeks. I then moved into private equity, did that for 6 years. And I always knew I wanted to start something, but I wasn't quite sure what my unique skill set was. Loved being in Excel, loved data, really found my niche even in private equity in the data side of really monitoring portfolio companies and assimilating that data into visuals. And so I thought I would ski bum for 6 months, take a break, and then go to business school. And I found myself in Aspen, Colorado, and wanted to ski bum, but instead I fell into the role of development director for the Aspen Santa Fe Ballet, which is a world-renowned contemporary ballet company. And this was kind of going full circle back to my roots, because prior to working in investment banking, I was a professional ballerina. So I kind of felt like I was coming home, but also applying my skill set of what I had learned towards fundraising for a ballet company. So it really was amazing to feel like I'm home again and with my people, in more of an artistic sense. But really on day one, I opened up their CRM, Razor's Edge from Blackbaud, and I was like, wow, looks like it was built on, the 90s, and, really just is a static way to capture information, which everyone needs, a CRM. But I was like, how are we really performing? And so I pulled out all the data, dumped it into Excel, and applied my investment banking skill set of, okay, let's actually analyze this and look at trends and where the history was. And really it was just for myself to get a handle on what things were, how things were going with the organization. And really I did these, manual Excel line graphs of plotting different campaigns, different donor types over time, and, printed them on legal size paper. And the executive director was like, this is the best thing I've ever seen. Oh my goodness. It's like, because everything else is really sticky notes, a sticky note of this person gave 10,000 yesterday. And, I was like, this can't be how we do this. And really, we started doing that. It was a pretty time consuming process to do it manually. So I'd do it quarterly. We would print up these line graphs, taped them to the wall, and really within 1 year, by tracking, really having a visual of tracking where we were, we actually had our best fundraising year ever. And then I went to another nonprofit, more on the finance side. They had just experienced their biggest operating deficit. I kind of applied the same things, my investment banking skill set, started looking at their history, their expenses, diving in, doing some very preliminary forecasting. And within 6 months, they went from the worst operating deficit they had to their best operating surplus. And so really seeing how just some simple data-driven analytics can delight the leadership teams, wow the board, move the needle towards strategy, not what are we doing, but why and how are we doing it? And that's really where it's like, I can affect change. And so we, we started apt, and now we have some tech to automate it. It's not a manual process, but really we do the white glove delivery for nonprofits and independent schools so that they have this at their fingertips.
That's amazing. I love that you saw the need firsthand, and it's amazing that you had the skill set to be able to like solve that problem sort of on the spot, doing it all manually, and then working on solving that problem more at scale for organizations. Yeah. Do you find that, over time, do you find that this is still a challenge for all types of nonprofits, or are you focusing more on smaller nonprofits that maybe don't have like the highest level of systems or in-house staff to help with some of this like data visualization and decision making? Or are you still seeing this kind of across the board in the sector?
I'm seeing this across the board in the sector. Sometimes I'm really surprised when I get on the phone with the $100 million plus operating budget nonprofits, and they still say, we have a data team. We don't really know on a day-to-day basis of where our annual fund is. And that's at, the university level. I've heard that. And, we don't have a great way of tracking different things, and we just had a customer reach out to us and say, we just lost our data person, and they were doing kind of manual KPIs, and they're not going to replace that person because, I think human capital is the most important thing at nonprofits. But it doesn't always make sense to have a data person. The best data people, the reality is they probably aren't going to be at a nonprofit, because you go to a nonprofit because you're excited about the mission, not necessarily because you want to be doing the data. And for a fraction of the cost, we are replacing that person. And so I'm really excited about that. It's not that we're trying to displace jobs, we're trying to fill the gap in a more operationally efficient way for nonprofits. So the dollars can be spent on the fundraising team, on the core people that really can drive the organization forward, and not necessarily on someone who's doing the data, because when they leave, they have no one that can do it. And that doesn't help anyone either.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. Can you help connect the dots for us? So an organization, you mentioned like the two examples of the organizations where you worked, taking that data, compiling it, visualizing it, being able to analyze it, which resulted in no more deficit, surplus, best fundraising year. Like, what are the dots in between? So how did those organizations actually use that data and to take action? What are the actions that they took based on the data that they saw? Like, what happened in between? Because oh my gosh, I'm sure you talk about this when you're selling your software and your services, but I'm like, okay, that's what I want to know. Like what happened in between?
Right. So I'm very passionate about just making nonprofits more sustainable, transparent, and ultimately impactful. And I think when you have this layer of transparency of this is what's going on in the organization, and you present it accordingly to the board, you then have better conversations of, oh no, we can't do this right now because we're already over on expenses. Let's table that for next year, and revisit that and put it into the budget for next year, rather than making these ad hoc decisions mid-year. Or this campaign blew things out of the water. We don't have to wait till next year to do this initiative. We actually can do it now because we've surpassed expectations. So it's the decision making using real-time data versus, half the time you go to boards and it's like, oh, this is our latest financials, but doesn't include X, Y, and Z, or, we just had the gala. So, and then the board's like, oh, we have no idea what's going on.
So true. Yes.
Yeah. I've heard that time and time again, and it's just it's avoiding the surprises that I think really helps people say, are we on track to our goals or not? And if you have a very clear picture, you can then act accordingly, right? So it's like, okay, maybe we need to pull back on expenses. Maybe we can't hire this person just yet, or maybe we can't start this initiative just yet. or maybe we can, and this initiative is what's going to help move the needle forward. But it's allowing the board and the leadership teams to actually have those conversations rather than being confused as to where they stand and operating kind of in a black hole vacuum of, okay, this is a mission driven, so we're gonna make this strategic decision now, when really maybe it should be in 3 months and 6 months, and it should be planned for, slated in your projections, etc. So it's kind of this, I feel like it's this waterfall effect of really moving the conversation again from what to why and how. Why are we under or overperforming? And then how are we going to address it, or how are we going to change our initiatives to react accordingly?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've been to so many board meetings that it's like, we're having a board meeting in March, but we're reviewing December financials. Well, that's great, but also not, because like that was 3 months ago. Who cares where we were in December? Like what's important is where we are right now. And so I love that idea of having more real-time data, because I think what I'm hearing you say is like, it allows the organization to be more proactive versus reactive if we're looking at old data, because it takes us so long to like compile it or, pull it out of the donor database or whatever. We're much more reactive versus proactive. And I love that you pointed out the transparency allows the board and leadership to have better conversations. And I talk about transparency a lot too. And that when you are transparent about your numbers with, of course, the right audience, that audience is then so much more like bought in to what you're doing, so much more engaged, which like, yeah, we want the board more engaged. Yes, we want the leadership team and our staff more engaged. So I love that you sort of made that connection as well. I think that's super important. I'd love to talk about building budgets because I know that you have sort of a fresh way of thinking about building budgets based on strategy. And I know that like, to most nonprofit leaders, building their budget is just a box that they have to check. We need a budget. It has to be approved by the board. We'll put it into QuickBooks, and like, it's something that we have to do. And so I would love to hear how you're kind of taking a fresh look at the budget process with a more strategic lens.
Sure. How much time do we have? No, I'm just the budget is really the most important to me, obviously coming from finance, but I was in fundraising. It's one of the most important things you can do each year because it can set the stage. It's a time to recalibrate. It's the time to look at how did we do this past year against expectations? What was right? What was wrong? If you do it properly, you can come within dollars, of a budget, but it takes time and it's a bottoms up approach. I see a lot of budgets where a lot of line items are last year's expense and it's divided by 12, or last year's revenue divided by 12. I think to me, the most important thing about a budget is to keep it simple. And when you have something divided by 12, you often get these random, not round numbers. You have, some expense has like, it's $14,722.88. Well, it's kind of just make it 15,000, I really love clean, simple, round numbers in budgets because it helps people remember certain numbers. Our revenue goal is $2 million, not 1.8, a number you can't remember.
Mm-hmm.
Our expenses are this. Kind of circling back to your last question on, what were things that really specific steps we took to have turnarounds. It kind of goes into the budgeting process of looking at your curves. And you don't need to do this for every single account, but it's the Pareto principle, 20% makes up 80%. So look at your biggest 20% line items and really look at their curves. Look at what happened in March of last year, what happened in August, how did things flow? And if you see a spike in a specific quarter, with one organization, it was like all of your cash flows are coming in the last 4 months of your fiscal year. And if you don't have better visibility starting out and everything's coming in the last 4 months, how are you going to know how you're going to end the year? I mean, there's just no way. And then by the second to last week of the year, you're scrambling in to get all these donations and you've had no visibility. And so that was, again, part of the budgeting process, and seeing those curves and saying, we really need to figure out a way to move cash flows forward in the year. A, this is going to help with our sustainability. And B, is going to give us visibility so that the last 3 months of the year, you're focusing on how are we performing. And if we're under budget, then we can take the necessary steps, look for that major gift, look for a grant where we need to supplement the budget. Maybe we need to watch our expenses for 3 months. But it was moving the cash flow timing forward. It's like, okay, our gala event is the last 4 months of the year. And then also for all of our board dues renewals, I was like, let's move the board dues forward to the first part of the year. And that really just helped change the entire cash flow problem of the organization. But that was through looking at the curves and really projecting so that you have a handle on where your cash is at any given time. And so those are some of the things I could go into more about, how to effectively use endowment draws. If you have an endowment, I personally believe if you cannot budget for endowment, it's a great way to have a buffer in your operating budget. And I also really believe in budgeting for operating surpluses and building in kind of your base case scenario of things can go wrong. So let's put some buffer into different accounts. And then knowing your growth. If you're okay, we raised 1.5 million last year, we want to raise 2 million next year. That's an arbitrary growth number. So how are you going to, what is the strategy? Is it $500,000 gifts? Is it a different campaign? Is it, how are you actually going to do that? It's like, oh, well, it just seemed like a nice growth number. Well, you need to actually have the strategy behind it. And that's where finance and fundraising really need to have that symbiotic relationship of being on the same page of what is the strategy and what are the plans. And then again, reporting on it to the board and having everyone on the same page of the growth strategy.
Yes. Oh my gosh. You're speaking my language. I feel like everybody listening has probably heard me like beat all of these things to death. So it's hearing it from a new person. See, I am not like obsessed with this for no reason. This is really important stuff. So I love hearing that from somebody else, this idea of like, okay, let's not set arbitrary numbers in our budget. We need a plan for it. And often I talk about, often having your expense budget align with your strategic plan as well. So like if your strategic plan, you're planning on doing, XYZ programs, well, let's make sure we actually have the budget for those, like the adequate budget in our budget so that we can actually do what we said we're going to do. So I loved, and I completely agree with everything that you're talking about when it comes to budgeting and really looking at previous years' data to be able to help you plan effectively for the following year. One thing that I don't actually do with our clients, but that I think is really interesting is like having round numbers for your budget as almost like I feel like it kind of helps with your mindset and really helping you be able to focus a little bit easier on the budget, because you're right. If you're like, okay, I'm going to raise $100,000 from individuals, and we just take $100,000 divided by 12. So, okay, we need to raise $8,333.33 every month. And you're like, wait, well, that's stupid. Let's just say we want to raise $9,000 a month from individuals or whatever, or even on the expense side. Okay, we have, a $10,000 budget for office supplies. All right, well, that's $833. Like, that's stupid. Just you have $1,000 a month. That's it. So I like that. And that's not something that I do. I feel like we, when I build budgets, I'm like, okay, we've got, our annual budget. And then when we divide it, we do divide it by 12. The annual budget has like there's a strategy behind it, or like, we know that we need XYZ and it makes up this number, but then we just divide by 12, but then you get weird numbers. So I like that. I think I will try that. And so does your software, does that help with some of this stuff? Because for you and I, when this is like our life and we live and breathe the numbers and we love data and we love analysis and we love spreadsheets, it's like, oh yeah, we could just like talk happily about this all day long. But there's probably a lot of people listening that are like, okay, this feels very overwhelming. Like, where do I begin? Does apt like help with some of this stuff, or where would you say would be a good place for a nonprofit leader to begin?
Sure. My whole mission and passion is to serve nonprofit leaders in a way to actually empower them. And where we solve it is we're taking that opportunity cost of time of someone manually creating board reports. I've never heard of someone that loved doing their board reports, where it was this fun and exciting process. It's this manual, cumbersome process. A lot of time goes into it. We're trying to take that burden off of individuals so that they can focus on what they're good at. Fundraising shouldn't be running reports from behind a computer. It should be engaging with donors. And so we're really trying to take that burden. And so we help with the analytics, and that's what we do. When someone comes to us for budgeting, we can refer them to consultants that we think are really good at it. We're starting to push content on, best practices for certain things. A side effect of being a white glove, delivery service of dashboard reports is we do advise on different things like, hey, we think this could be better, or this is falling behind, or, your data is really clean, or we have some work to do here. So we do help with that. We do take that burden off of nonprofits because I personally believe in freeing up people's time to move the organization forward and fulfill their mission. And so we want to take that burden on of actually doing the reports and the analytics.
Yeah, I think that's huge, because I do think you're right that is a huge pain point. And it's like a lot of times also the board reports or whatever reports the organization puts together for whatever purpose, it's like that was inherited from the person before you or the person before them. And it just gets into like, this is how we've always done it. And they end up being like not that useful, a pain to put together. And I feel like, half the time the recipient is not really even looking at them anyway. So I love that you kind of have this fresh, like, okay, let's pull the right data together in the right way. Yeah, I think that's awesome. Let's see. Do you feel like, I feel like the work that you're doing is a little bit innovative and fresh in the nonprofit sector where, okay, like, yes, we all have data, we all like have our financials, but the way that you're kind of pulling it together and your approach is different than I think what we see at a lot of organizations. Are you pulling a lot of what you did in, on Wall Street and in your finance career? Is that kind of pulling into what you're doing today?
100%. I feel like I've become the investment banker for nonprofits. But it's really, again, it's to empower leadership teams to know their numbers and feel comfortable with their numbers, not be up till 2 a.m. scrambling before a board meeting. They should be able to be, in more of a Zen type state before a board meeting where they're really focused on what the conversation should be versus everything they need, all the materials they need to compile. I'm very much a fan of keeping it simple. Let's keep it simple. Let's standardize it and let's automate it. So we remove that friction. And really it's to empower leaders to feel comfortable with their numbers because, that's maybe not, like you said, some people are listening to this and they feel overwhelmed. Where do they even start? We start by knowing your numbers. And if that's made easier for you, a lot of people are saying, I actually feel really comfortable now communicating with the board and presenting to the board because I have this support. And so, yeah, I think we are kind of bringing the investment banking side and really empowering nonprofits from a business perspective, which sometimes gets a little bit left behind when we're so busy focusing on fulfilling our mission.
Yeah. Yeah. And I find that a lot of nonprofit leaders are very overwhelmed because they're wearing all the hats. And so as a result, they're not able to show up as their best self, as the highest version of them to their work, to board meetings, to interactions. So like you said, instead of staying up till 2:00 in the morning, like pulling together these reports, they're coming in with, with a much stronger presence because they're not like, doing something that is outside of their comfort zone or skill set or whatever, because they've got the tools to kind of help them do that. And I just feel like that is everyone that I'm talking to on the show is coming, is working in the nonprofit sector in different ways. But the common thread that I'm seeing is that nonprofit leaders are overwhelmed and burnt out.
Yep.
And so as a result, they cannot show up as the highest version of themselves. And that is really not like, that's certainly doing a detriment to them, but also to the mission and to the cause. And that's where the impact really is. And I feel like we're all in this work to have an impact. But if you can't show up as a best version of yourself, then you're not having the impact that you could. And so I love that, your work is helping people show up as better leaders. I think that's awesome.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And, I know that you do a lot of, your work is all about building a sustainable organization. And I mean, that's what I talk about all the time as well. And I feel like the key to a sustainable organization is one that has a really strong financial foundation. So do you want to talk a little bit more about, what it looks like to have a sustainable organization?
Yes, I would love to. I think we really want to have kind of a new dialogue around what a sustainable organization looks like. And to me, it's not just meeting your budget numbers, but maybe exceeding them. How can we use different things to achieve our goals? And to me, human capital is the most valuable part of a nonprofit organization. And I think sometimes we forget about that. Nonprofit organizations don't exist without the people supporting them on their mission, either from the fundraising, the finance, and obviously the most important, the program engagement side. And I think metrics kind of GuideStar is a charity navigator, having those ratings, it's I think sometimes a little bit misleading on the ratings on how much you're spending on personnel expenses. I think people get really worried about those things, but you need to be paying the best people that are living, breathing your mission, and you need to be making sure that they're motivated, and that's done through paying them, celebrating wins. I often see, like you said, the leadership team's often really burnt out. If you're burnt out, you're wearing too many hats, you don't have time to celebrate your team and celebrate the wins. And so for me, it's how do we change the conversation of what sustainable is? It's you don't want team turnover. You want people really engaged and motivated. And so, like you said, your strategic plan, your budget needs to align with the team morale. How are you, you have a strategy. Are you having those wins? Are you celebrating them? Are you pushing and elevating people forward? And then, so I think sometimes things get lost, or like, we're so focused on expenses and no, personnel can't grow by more than 3% a year. Or how do we change that conversation? How do we think about employee performance in a different way? Nonprofits are slightly different from a business in terms of employee performance. You don't necessarily have a sales team that can get commission, but you need to really elevate your team. And really, the most cohesive teams are the ones that are performance driven, motivated by the mission, and the leader, we're not on a rudderless ship of where we don't know where we are from a budget perspective. We know where we're going. We know what the team needs to be. And so I think we really need to start changing the conversation of how valuable the team members are, and what that team makeup should look like, and how they're being fostered during the year, because it's a grind. I mean, nonprofits can be a grind. Oftentimes you start over. I mean, from a fundraising perspective, you start from zero every year, it feels like. And, you have to climb the mountain every year. And then sometimes you get there, sometimes you don't. And when you get there, it's often not celebrated. And so really trying to change that dialogue, and also change the metrics of how much you're spending. I mean, human capital is what makes a nonprofit organization.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting, especially your point about the Charity Navigator ratings. They don't take people into account because that's not something that organizations are consistently measuring. But you're right that people are at the center of an organization. Like, who cares how much cash you have in the bank if you have 3-month reserve or a 9-month reserve, if your people are miserable and quitting because they can't take care of themselves, or because they're not being paid a living wage or whatever. That's really interesting that that's not really taken into account at all. Do you see any organizations really doing this well, and really taking care of you're shaking your head. I was going to say really taking care of their people in a meaningful way? And if so, what are they doing? But maybe you don't have any examples.
I see bits and pieces of it, which gives me hope. Employee turnover is time consuming and expensive, and it's going to distract you from your mission. And if you have that just constant distraction of employee turnover, how are you going to be sustainable? 1 + 1 does, it just doesn't add up. And I hear this from board members a lot. And so it's something that I've really started to think about, on how the team and the personnel behind it, and keep retaining them, how important it is to create a sustainable organization. I think that dialogue is not something I hear often. I do know some organizations where the people have been loyal, have been there for many, many years. I don't see a lot of turnover. And I think that should be our next conversation, is I need to sit down with them and say, how are you doing this? How are you keeping your team for so long? And why? And I think, and I see it in the numbers. I can think of one organization, I haven't seen any turnover that we've been working with for a while, and they're consistently exceeding expectations from a financial and fundraising perspective. And so the proof is in the pudding right there. What is the magic sauce to do that? I think it's really having a strong leader that's focused on the team and the mission, and not wearing too many hats. Is, again, keeping it simple, focusing on what matters and not focusing on what doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's huge. I would love to see some more stats and some more data on how employee turnover, or lack thereof, is correlated with financial success, and what that link is. Like you said, what's that special sauce that's making this happen? Yeah, that's so interesting. And like I said, everyone that I've talked to for this show, and just otherwise, conversations recently are it's all about the people, and we're not taking care of our people in a way that is meaningful to them. And I was thinking, I know as entrepreneurs and kind of in the, business owner space, it's very normal to invest tens of thousands of dollars into a business coach, into a mastermind, into ongoing professional development. And it's pulling teeth to get a nonprofit leader to invest $1,000 into a course or something. It's just, there's not that same value there. And I wonder why, and I wonder how we can change that.
I think, performance reviews are important. And the most important thing is to have a 5-year strategic plan and have employee morale and retention as part of your strategic plan. That should be a very important part of the strategic plan. And each person needs to feel like they're a stakeholder in that strategic plan. And I think that I see that really can motivate people. They get excited, when they're achieving their goals, and it's shows up on the strategic plan. Did X, Y, and Z achieve these 5 benchmarks? And so I think it is really important, and it's something that gets lost. And maybe we start with promoting that every strategic plan should have an employee morale, performance review, and retention piece to it.
I love that. And I think attaching some numbers to that, like, can we have some actual KPIs related to our team? Because I feel like financial data, obviously very important. Yes, expenses and revenue. And I feel like maybe not most organizations that we work with have those financial goals and those KPIs. And then we've also got programmatic KPIs, because a lot of times we need that programmatic data in order to apply for funding and grants and things, and to be able to show our impact. So we've got our programmatic KPIs, but we don't have the same level of KPIs and metrics and the way that we're measuring our employees' happiness and success, and if they're thriving or not. Do you see, like, what are some, so I think retention is one that you've mentioned. Are there other like employee related KPIs that you think are good for nonprofits to be looking at?
I think it's salary growth is definitely one. How are you rewarding your top performers? And how are you assessing your top performers? And so I think, what's the KPI for happiness? But, I think it's having a two-way feedback, getting feedback from employees, maybe sending out anonymous surveys where people feel like they're in a comfortable space to give feedback, and really staying out in front of the ball on making sure you're not going to run into surprises with some of your key personnel. And I think deep down, every leader gut feel knows when they're missing the mark, but whether or not they're going to do something about it, that's the harder thing to do. And, thinking about what are those KPIs, and they may differ for different organizations based off the mission. But for fundraising, maybe it's you want to make sure that person is out there having meetings. Maybe it's how many meetings did you have this month, or how many phone calls, and where's the human interaction, that really is what's driving that person in that position anyways. I don't know a single fundraiser who joined not to go out and have meetings with donors and engage in the community. And how do you measure that for that specific employee?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I feel like a lot of times, this type of conversation and thought around, taking care of our staff is an afterthought, and not because we don't care about our team. Like you said, like leaders care. They often have this sort of gut feeling or a pulse on how things are going, but not like that data. Not that data. And I just did another episode. I just recorded another episode with my friend Krista, who's a grant writer, and she's been in the sector for a long time. And she was like, if nonprofits are not taking care of their employees, if they're not paying their employees a living wage, if they don't have the money to invest in like the foundation of the organization, like cut your programs, build the foundation. So then you can get the existing programs fully funded. You can make sure your team is paid. You can make sure everyone's taken care of. Like that's the foundation that's going to lead to a sustainable organization that's making an impact like decades from now. But if you're just doing so much that you can't take care of these foundational things, like cut your programs. I was like, whoa, that is some tough love, but it's so true. That if we're not focusing on these foundational elements, like the impact that we want to have from the program side of things is going to be short-lived because we're not going to be around. And we're not going to have that really high quality talent that's so passionate about what we do. So, Yeah. So I love that. Awesome. Okay. So if nonprofits are like, yes, I'm all about the data, where do I start? What do I do? Where do they start? What do they do? Let's like some actionable steps for our listeners.
Yeah. So, you can reach out to us, where I'm always happy to take the phone call, kind of advise on where you stand with your data, what the next steps might be. Maybe it might not necessarily be our services, but, happy to advise on, oh, you have X, Y, and Z issues. Maybe it's a simple fix. Maybe the finances are a mess and they need to call you. But, anyone can feel free to reach out, but also if you have someone in-house that can do this for you, say, okay, let's, take a pause, take a step back, look at things from a financial perspective or from a fundraising perspective. Let's get a handle on some of our trends. We can do that in-house, or people can happily reach out to me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, the last question that I like to ask all of our guests is, what does a prosperous nonprofit look like to you?
One that is fulfilling its mission in a way that is sustainable for the long term. And that means they know where they're going. They have the guideposts and the support in place to do that, from just kind of wrapping it in all of the pieces that we just talked about into our conversation, the team and the support to elevate the mission of the organization. And so if they're fulfilling their mission, whatever that mission may be, from education to arts and culture, and they're out there, it doesn't have to be a big nonprofit, but they're operating in a sustainable way. Their expenses aren't bloated, and they're able to reinvest any operating surplus at the end of the day back into their programs and into the people and the mission of the organization. To me, that is a prosperous nonprofit.
I love that. That's beautiful. Thank you. Well, Kaitlin, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom, and just appreciate you so much. So if our listeners want to find you or want to learn more about APT, where should they go?
You can find me just at my email, Kaitlin, Kaitlin @apt.io, or you can go to our website, apte.io. You can book a meeting right from our website. And we're happy to do kind of a free consultation for any of your listeners on next steps for data.
Amazing. Oh my gosh. Everybody needs to go take advantage of this. Go check out APT and reach out to Kaitlin to learn more about how this can help your organization bring more data and more clarity, and really help you be a better leader. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kaitlin. It was great to chat.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.